Do you want to know how I feel about the Throne of Glass books, but in a non-spoilery way? Well, friends, today, let's rank them against each other, shall we? Hi guys, welcome back, bienvenue, and all that jazz. It's time to talk about some books. Or specifically today, I'm going to be just talking about the Throne of Glass series. So if you do not know, over the last 2 months, I have read all 8 books in that series, and I have thoughts, feelings, some emotions, and yes. So I thought it'd be fun today to just do like one of those old school, like I don't see them as often anymore, but those like fun little tier ranking videos. So I'll pop up the screen like picture in picture style when I get to that part. But just a heads up, I will be keeping this as non-spoilery as possible. But it is like an 8-book series, so like just be aware, like I won't be spoiling any specific plot points, and I won't be mentioning like specific character names and stuff, at least later on in the series. So like you're safe if you haven't read it, but if you are like uber duper sensitive to any kind of even remote tangential spoiler-ish territory, then maybe this isn't the video for you. But if you want to hear some thoughts about the Throne of Glass series, then we're about to talk about it. And if you somehow don't know, the Throne of Glass series is an 8-book young adult, maybe it broadens out into like maybe new-ish adult by the end of the series, centering on Celaena Sardothien, who is this famous assassin in this country known as Aderlan. And in this country, at some point, the king has done things and he's not a great person, and so there's some kind of rebellion type plots. There's some magical competition plots, especially in book 1, Throne of Glass. Then the world definitely expands pretty rapidly, starting at like book 3 and onwards, into this kind of like more worldwide type conflict. It's a massive cast of characters. There's some romancy type stuff that I don't think is particularly done very well, but also I am not the target audience. I am not a young adult woman, so take my opinions on that with a grain of salt. But anyways, let's dive right into this, shall we? So, we'll start with the order that I read these books. I read the prequel novellas first, even though I think they were published either between Crown of Midnight and Heir of Fire, so books 2 and 3, or book 3 and 4. I don't really know. So you could look that up and read them in publication order. I personally really enjoyed reading them in like chronological in-world order because the Assassin's Blade gives you a lot of perspective on some of the trauma that Celaena has gone through and how she ends up where she is at the beginning of book 1, Throne of Glass. She's in this like slave camp, like a slave salt mine type place. And so you get to see like how she got there, and then she'll mention some names and some things that happened in the Assassin's Blade that obviously, if you haven't read the Assassin's Blade, you won't have context for them, but you could always read them in publication order and then get like context in like hindsight. But like that's not my favorite. I kind of like to know the context going in, but that's just me. And then we'll just quickly go over our 5 categories. So we have the top category is yes, like I loved it. It was great, fantastic. None of these books were 5 stars, I don't think. One of them got very close, like 4.75, but some of the romance elements still. So that's the top category. The next one is you better work. Like really enjoyed, had a great time. The next one is it was pretty good. Like I'm not mad that I read it. The next one is meh. It was okay, you know. And then the last one is which is sometimes how I feel with some of Sarah J. Maas's stuff. So let's start right off. Assassin's Blade. So this is the prequel novellas. It is the introduction to the world. I think it has the best romance that I've read from Sarah J. Maas. And so the Assassin's Blade firmly goes in you better work. Like I had a great time with the Assassin's Blade. I usually don't love like short stories. And this is kind of like a short story-ish collection, but they all tie together. So it's kind of like an overarching novella, and I had a great time. You get introduced to Celaena, Sam, Arabin. You get to see some of her shenanigans with assassinry. And there's some plot threads and stuff that start here that pay off all the way down the line in like book 5. So she definitely does some of those big overarching plots that will carry you throughout the series. So Assassin's Blade is great. Then book 1, Throne of Glass. This one, so Throne of Glass kind of has a little bit more of like a competition type vibe. So Selena is in the like slave mines, and then she gets invited to take place to be the king's champion, to basically be the private assassin of the king of Aderlan. And there's a lot of reasons why that's a very complicated situation. We get to meet some of my favorite characters in the series. We get to meet Nehemia. We get to meet Dorian. We get to see some of those things happen. But this one definitely feels much younger in tone with that whole competition thing. There are some interesting like world elements that are introduced in this book that get vastly expanded upon in later books. So it's pretty good. Not my fave, not my least fave. It's pretty good. Then book 2, Crown of Midnight. So Crown of Midnight, I'm gonna be honest, I'm like thinking about it now and I'm like, what happened in Crown of Midnight? Which does not bode well. Like, I can remember specific things in all of the other books, but not Crown of Midnight. So I'm gonna put it in meh, because clearly nothing happened in there that was strong enough for me to remember even 2 months after reading it. So that is an indicator that it is not the best. Anyways, we'll move right along. Okay, so Heir of Fire. So this book is many people's favorite of the series. There is a dramatic reveal that happens at the very end that I clocked really early on. But this is definitely where you start to see some of those deeper plot threads. You get to start being introduced to even more of our cast of characters. I don't remember if it's in Crown of Midnight or Heir of Fire where we first meet Manon Blackbeak, a Iron Tooth witch, but she, by the end of the series, is one of my favorite characters, maybe ever. Like, I really loved her arc, loved it. So Heir of Fire, I'm gonna say it's in You Better Work. It's not quite yes, because I didn't love everything about it. There's definitely some introductions of some romantical plot threads here where it's like that very over-domineering, fey, male, gross, toxic masculinity type. And that's just not my tea, not my jam, not my... It doesn't... So because of that, that book really got dragged down for me. But by the end, we were cooking with gas. Is that still a phrase? We're cooking with gas today, kids. It was great. Okay. I don't know why that keeps popping up on the side, so I'm sorry. But book 4 now, we're on to Queen of Shadows. Okay, so this is where we get real good. So is this book yas, or is it just top of You Better Work? It might be top of You Better Work, and that's mainly because in the first like 20-ish, 30% of this book, there is some interpersonal confliction between Kale, which don't get me started on Kale Westfall, but between Selena and Kale, and they are like the most petty, snipey, just like irrationally mean. Like, I cannot with those two. And Kale especially just goes like real deep for things that I'm like, but what? But by the end, oh my gosh, the ending to Queen of Shadows, freaking amazing. Then we get to Empire of Storms. So that is firmly in the yes! This is my 4.75 star favorite book of the entire series. And let me tell you why. So for the majority of the Throne of Glass books, or Sarah J. Maas in general, because I've also read the 2 books currently out in the Crescent City series, she tends to have like a very slow, very interpersonal driven first 30%. And her interpersonal drama is like telenovela realness on crack via the CW. So it's just like the most obscene, ridiculous, just like, ugh. And like, if there was like peaks and valleys where sometimes they were dramatic and sometimes they weren't, I think I might enjoy it more. But these characters with their drama are always on 10. And I'm like, okay, dial it back a little. So she does a lot of that for the first like 30-ish%, sometimes 50% of her books. And I don't love that, and I really don't like the way that she does romance. I think it's very like childish and juvenile, especially when you consider that she tends to like having, like, I think Selena in these books is late teens, so like 17, 18, 19 years old by the end of the book, or by the end of the series, and then her romantical interest is like 600 years old. So we'll just ignore the weird, awkward age difference, but also the 600-year-old dude acts like he's a 15-year-old horny teenager. And I'm always just like, whatever. And it's always because, oh, he's her mate and he just she drives these primal instincts. No. No. So Empire of Storms doesn't do any of that. It starts right off the gate. We are running, sprinting, we're cooking. It's so good. And there are some like battle at sea elements, but it is so good. There's interesting plot threads that involve like the gods of this world. There are interesting plot threads of trying to bring legends to life, to fulfill prophecies, because this is where we're starting to gather our forces to head towards that final battle. And so good. And then then we get to Tower of Dawn. So Tower of Dawn is book 6 in the series. However, it happens in a concurrent timeline with Empire of Storms. So basically 2 of our characters have split off from the main group and they go to the southern continent to start driving up forces for the final battle from the southern continent, which is this separate empire. While Selena and the rest of the crew is getting people in other places. And then, and it follows like my least favorite people. So everybody knows Tower of Dawn is Kale's book, and Kale is a whiny little bitch. And people always give him this like grace of like, oh, well, he's been through trauma. And like, I'm sorry, like trauma, yes. People working through trauma can be a difficult time. Sometimes people are not the most fun to deal with when they are going through their trauma. Yes, totally understand. However, never, ever, ever will you hear me saying that trauma excuses cyclical bad behavior. Like, he treats the people around him like literal shit. He is like a nightmare sometimes. And like, no amount of trauma that you've been through excuses you being emotionally abusive to the people around you. And so we do not stand Kale. He does work through his stuff, but this book especially has a very like cyclical nature. Then like the last 20-25%, you get some really pivotal world building elements that really let you know what's going to be going down in that final book. But Kale, oh my god, Kale, you're gonna go further in the because like the last 20% does not make the first 80% great. So on that, and then Kingdom of Ash. This is the grand finale, and I'm gonna say it's gonna go on the bottom of You Better Work, and here's why. So it is obscenely long. 900, you heard that right, with a 9. 980 pages. 80 pages long. So almost 1,000 pages. And there are some interesting threads in this book, but we take a long time to start getting into the final battle. And the final battle lasts for 300 pages. And I'm going to say that there's one main plot thread involving some magical objects in this world that the way that it was wrapped up, like it was like, okay. And then it was also kind of weird because it happened like at like the 80% mark. So there's still like 20% left of the book. And these magical objects were like hyped for so long. And then the way that they were like resolved, I was like, okay. But the way that the final battles happened with the big bad, it was so good. And then it did get a little like Return of the King ending with like the Hobbit smiles at the end, where there's like a whole lot of like goodbye, like for quite a while. But I was surprised Because as I read these books, I didn't really think that anybody in particular like sat in my feels or anything like that. But somehow, when we got to the end and all of these like goodbye scenes and all of the resolution of post-battleness, I was like, oh my god, I actually really like these characters. It like snuck up on me and stabbed me in the ass. But sometimes that's fun. But so I think that ending, especially since I thought it was a really solid resolution to the series, and I was kind of happy with where most of the characters ended up. That kind of pushed it up, because for most of the book it was pretty good. There was a solid section of it that was meh because it was a little bit boring, and things were way more drawn out than they needed to be. Some serious editing could have bopped this up all the way to a yas, because like the way that the plot resolved, I was actually really happy with. For the most part, I mean, it was very YA feeling in that not saying that YA is lesser in any way, but YA, since it's focused on a younger audience, tends to not be as harsh to its characters. And so typically speaking, many characters in YA books really don't die. And so I felt similarly in this series, that not that she needed to murder everybody, but some more death could have made the stakes feel more real. But that being said, not everybody does survive. So, but with the way that some of the things resolved, it does feel a little bit convenient, a little bit neat, not quite as like impactful as it could have been, but it was still great. It was great. I'm not gonna lie. And I think I really enjoyed this because besides Crescent City, this is like the first like full series buddy read that I've ever done since like becoming more active in the booktube community. And I had a great time with Jashana and Ingrid. Like, it was so much fun, and I feel like we've, through our journey, have become such like good friends, and like I just loved reading these books with them, and so I think they will be forever special to me for that reason. And the story is great. I can see why people have loved these for so long. There are many elements of it, especially the romance, that not for me, but also I'm a 31-year-old going on 32, aka going on dead, gay man. So I'm not exactly the target audience for the Throne of Glass series, which I would say is probably aimed at females aged 15 to like 22 max. And I am not, nor have I ever been part of that demographic. But I think let's take one last look over these. Tower of Dawn is by far the worst. Crown of Midnight, Throne of Glass. Kingdom of Ash might get bumped up. I think I liked it better than Heir of Fire and better than Assassin's Blade. So I think Kingdom of Ash actually goes there. But Assassin's Blade I liked better than Heir of... I mean, these are pretty equal, so they could kind of go either way. Assassin's Blade and Heir of Fire, pretty equivalent for me. But then Kingdom of Ash is better than both. Queen of Shadows I like better than Kingdom of Ash, and Empire of Storms by far my favorite of the series. And so that finishes up my ranking of the Throne of Glass series. Have you read this series? If so, let me know your order. What's your favorite book? What's your least favorite book? Do you agree, disagree? Want to fight me in the streets? Want to catch me outside because of any of the things that I said about this series? Let me know in those comments down below. While you're down there, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already, if you want to see more bookish shenanigans like this from moi. Other than that, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!